Okay, this is a presentation that I delivered at the Lisbon Addictions Conference on Thursday, the 24th of October 2019, and it was part of a roundtable symposium organised by FuturiZe on safer drugs, and I spoke about safer nicotine delivery products. Here are my disclosures. Okay, so we all know that smoking kills, and the statistics are really quite staggering. Around 8 million people a year die as a consequence of smoking-related disease worldwide, and that's one person every 6 seconds. And the World Health Organization estimates that by the end of the century, 1 billion lives will be lost to smoking. Now, almost all of the harms from smoking come from the process of combustion, the burning of tobacco, which releases thousands of compounds, tar, which sticks to the lungs and the airways, allowing carcinogenic compounds to build up, causing respiratory disease and cancer, and carbon monoxide, which reduces the transportation of oxygen around the body, causing cardiovascular disease. Nicotine, on the other hand, whilst addictive, is relatively safe, and this observation that it's the nicotine that keeps people smoking, but the actual smoke or the tar that harms people was made long ago, over 40 years ago, by Professor Mike Russell in his quote that has now become quite famous and widely repeated. So despite the widespread awareness of the harmful effects of smoking, many people continue to smoke. And that's because stopping smoking permanently is so very difficult. Over time, through the process of conditioning and associative learning, smoking becomes a highly overlearned behaviour. It's only partially subject to voluntary control. And the act of smoking is repeatedly rewarded, and abstinence from nicotine is punished. Now, around 2/3 of smokers report that they want to stop smoking every year, and around 1/3 make a quit attempt. But unfortunately, the long-term success rates in those attempting to quit remains very low. So, with so many smokers failing to quit and others, about 1/3, not even wanting to quit, what else can be done? So tobacco harm reduction is another approach that could be taken to try and bring down those smoking rates. So rather than focusing on complete cessation of nicotine, tobacco harm reduction refers to alternative, safer ways of delivering nicotine without the harmful effects of burning tobacco. So it allows people to continue using nicotine, but to avoid or substantially reduce the health risks associated with smoking. Now, over the last 10 years or so, we've seen a huge rise in the availability of reduced risk nicotine products. This is a slide taken from Clive Bates, and it classifies products into those that heat a nicotine-containing liquid, such as e-cigarettes and other vaping products, those that contain tobacco which is heated but not burnt, and then unheated tobacco-free nicotine products such as traditional NRT, but other products as well, such as nicotine strips and so on. And then finally, smokeless tobacco products such as snus or moist snuff. And these are products that are not heated. Now, these products are likely to span a continuum of harm themselves, with some probably being much safer than others. However, none of them involve burning, hence they're all likely to be considerably less harmful than smoking. And some countries are now starting to show that some of these products can actually displace smoking. So, for example, if we look at smoking prevalence across the EU as a whole, we can see the average shown in green here is 24% of individuals daily smoking. But what's particularly striking is the very low prevalence of daily smoking in Sweden compared to the rest of the EU. And this is because in Sweden, nicotine is consumed predominantly without smoke in the form of snus, which is a small pouch that looks rather like a tea bag, and it's kept in the mouth between the gum and the cheek. And this difference in the way that nicotine is consumed through snus rather than through combustible tobacco has made a clear difference to health, with considerably fewer smoking-related deaths in Sweden compared to the rest of the EU. Similarly, in Japan, cigarette sales have fallen by around a third in the last 3 years, and this has coincided with the introduction of heated tobacco products, namely IQOS, which was introduced into Japan in April 2016. And in the UK, prevalence has been slowly falling, whilst vaping, shown in blue rather, has been rising. Prior to 2011, there was still a decline in smoking prevalence, but the decline has accelerated since 2012 with the introduction of e-cigarettes. Okay, so next, a quick flavour of the evidence on e-cigarettes for quitting smoking. I don't have time to do a comprehensive review of the evidence here, so this really is just a flavour. So, in an examination of US nationally representative survey data on smoking and e-cigarette use, Zhu and colleagues concluded that the substantial increase in e-cigarette use among adult smokers in 2014 to 15 was associated with a statistically significant increase in smoking cessation rates at the population level. And similarly in England, based on data from the Smoking Toolkit survey, which is a monthly survey of smoking and e-cigarette use led by colleagues at UCL. This also suggests that e-cigarettes are effective for quitting. So in this particular report, participants who reported having made a quit attempt in the last year were asked at the time of the survey whether they were still smoking, and 20% of those who reported that they were using an e-cigarette in their quit attempt reported that they were still not smoking at the time of the survey, compared to those who were either using no aid at all or those individuals who were using nicotine replacement therapy, NRT. And in the largest randomised controlled trial of e-cigarettes for smoking cessation to date, Peter Hayek's team at Queen Mary randomised 886 smokers who were attending the Stop Smoking services in England to either an e-cigarette starter pack or to a choice of their NRT, either a single product or a combination of different NRT products. And both groups were also provided with weekly behavioural support within the Stop Smoking service. And here are the results at 1 year. You can see that those individuals who used nicotine replacement therapy, the quit rates were just under 10%, whereas those who used an electronic cigarette, the quit rate was 18%. So almost a doubling of quit success with those individuals who were randomised to use an electronic cigarette. Now, what about effects on health? Well, you'd be excused for feeling totally confused about e-cigarettes based on what's reported in the press, with some very alarmist headlines saying that e-cigarettes are just as harmful as smoking, and then on the other hand, contradictory headlines that suggest that e-cigarettes are just as safe as fresh air, which of course is misleading too. Now, a full understanding of the health effects of e-cigarettes are likely to take years to emerge, but we have pretty good understanding of the risks relative to cigarette smoking based on emission studies which have informed us about the levels and the amount of chemicals in the vapour, and also biomarker studies in humans. So in a 2014 paper, Maciej Gonowitz and team compared levels of selected toxicants and carcinogens in aerosols from 12 different brands of electronic cigarettes, as well as in the Nicorette inhalator, and compared these to levels found in tobacco smoke. And the results showed that the levels of toxic compounds found in the aerosol of e-cigarettes were between 9 and 450 times lower, depending on which substance you were looking at, compared to the levels found in tobacco smoke. And in many cases, these levels were comparable to the trace amounts that were found in the reference product, that is the Nicorette inhalator. In a review by Stevens that was published last year in 2018, the cancer potencies of e-cigarettes were estimated based on published studies that looked at chemicals in e-cigarette emissions. And it was concluded from that review that the majority of e-cigarettes have potencies less than 1% of tobacco smoke. And although a small minority of products had higher potencies, these were associated with studies where there had been excessive power delivered to the atomizer under conditions that would not usually be considered suitable for vaping. Okay, so on to biomarker studies. So these slides are taken, donated by Leon Shahab, so thanks to Leon for these. One of the best ways of determining health effects of vaping is to explore biomarkers of exposure to known toxicants and carcinogens. So NNAL is a good example. It's a breakdown product of a known lung carcinogen, NNK, and it can be easily measured in urine. Now there were, up until 2017, there were 10 published papers with 8 studies that have reported on levels of NNAL in e-cigarette users, and these have used a variety of different methodologies and designs. And the participants in these studies varied in terms of how long they had quit smoking and switched to e-cigarettes. So in some cases, shown to the left-hand side of the x-axis, they had only switched for a very short period of time, for a few hours or days, and then moving along to the right along the x-axis, these represent the studies where e-cigarette users had been switched for a much longer period of time, so abstinent from smoking for much longer. And the y-axis shows the percentage reduction in NNAL levels compared to those found in smokers. And here are the results. So on average, there was a 91.4% decrease in NNAL levels. This is weighted by sample size in each study. And if you remove those ones shown at the far left-hand side where smokers had only switched for a short period of time, then this increased to a reduction of around 96% in NNAL levels. Now, what about other biomarkers? We can look at other biomarkers of cancer, respiratory disease, and cardiovascular disease. And across all these studies, you can see a reduction of between 40 to 90% compared to the levels found in smokers. But to put this into context, if we also plot typical levels found in non-smokers, you can see that these are generally very similar because some of these biomarkers are naturally found through other sources. Okay, so evidence from studies such as those that I've just outlined has led the Royal College of Physicians in its 2016 report to conclude that the risks associated with e-cigarette use are unlikely to exceed 5% of those associated with smoked tobacco products. Similarly, based on their evidence review of e-cigarettes in 2015, Public Health England also concluded that e-cigarettes are 95% less harmful than tobacco smoking. And this statement was repeated in their more recent evidence review that was published this year in 2019. Okay, now the same principles of tobacco harm reduction can also be applied to other drugs, and cannabis administration is a key example. With the increasing social acceptance of cannabis and with its legalization in many of the states of America, there have been a proliferation in alternative non-combustible forms of cannabis administration methods. These include those methods that either directly heat the raw material through dry herb vaporizers or through dabbing, for example, or through inhaling aerosol from heating a cannabis liquid in a cartridge. And the conclusions of this study, which were just published last month, were that when you look at the levels of hazardous compounds found in the aerosol products associated with heating or vaporizing cannabis, these were significantly lower compared to those found in smoked cannabis. So possibly a safer alternative of delivering cannabis. However, cannabis is still illegal in many US states, and even in states where it is legally available, prices are high and there's a thriving black market for cheaper THC vaping cartridges. These are pre-filled cartridges that contain THC oil and which can be fitted onto a regular e-cigarette and vapes. Here's some examples. Now, unfortunately, with any unregulated market, products can get contaminated, either when dealers cut the drug to make it go further, and, or in the case particularly here of THC liquids, when some product is used to thicken it up again, oils, for example, to make it look more genuine. And that seems to be what is happening recently in the US, that some contaminant or contaminants, not yet fully identified, but vitamin E acetate looks like one possible likely candidate, these have entered the black market THC vape cartridge supply chain and have started to cause this lung disease outbreak that has been reported a lot in the news recently. Now, unfortunately, this message that these lung poisonings are due to vaping THC oils has not been clearly communicated either through the US Centre for Disease Control and Prevention or in the media, which instead seems to be withholding information about the type of vaping that is causing these problems and instead appearing to blame e-cigarettes more generally. And this has caused widespread confusion and panic about regular nicotine vaping through electronic cigarettes, which has even led to calls to ban flavours and outright bans in other cases. Now, these inaccurate reports are not just misleading, though. They can actually be quite damaging and have serious consequences in two ways. So by not warning people to avoid the risky products, the THC oil illicit vape cartridges, this is likely to lead to more of these acute lung poisonings. And then secondly, by advising people not to use regular nicotine vaping products, e-cigarettes, this means smokers are more likely to continue to smoke if they believe e-cigarettes are just as harmful, and then consequently suffer the smoking-related disease associated with that smoking, rather than switch or stick with vaping. Okay, so amidst this chaos and confusing reporting, I think it's really important to stay calm, to stay close to the science, and as researchers, scientists, practitioners, it's imperative that we communicate accurately as lives really can be at stake. And to advise smokers who can't quit nicotine to use reduced risk nicotine products such as electronic cigarettes, licensed electronic cigarette products that is, and above all, just not to smoke. Thank you. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone who contributed their slides for me to use in this presentation. Thank you.